Hello, everyone. I am Tiffany Marley, the Project Director for the Learning Communities Resource Center, and we are pleased to welcome you to our Fall National Webinar Series, where we are highlighting our Anti-Poverty Practice Series. And today's series focusing on 3 cases related to trauma-informed approaches. All of those cases coming directly from the work of the Learning Communities Resource Center's effort over the course of our last project year. And so with that said, as we begin today's presentation, want to direct our attention towards the promise of community action that truly grounds our work. And that promise is community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And so we hold this promise in mind as we think about the work that we do in the life of the Learning Communities Resource Center, and our purpose being to analyze community action outcomes and identify effective and innovative innovative practice models that alleviate both the causes and the conditions of poverty. And with that said, as we look at the current LCRC project, as we call it, it seeks to support agencies in the identification, the adaptation, and really implementation of those innovative or evidence-informed practices, services, or strategies that address both that family or individual level and community level. Additionally, the other thing that we would call out related to what we do or we support agencies in is ultimately maximizing those outcomes that align with our national performance indicators. And in many ways, our national performance indicators can get played out or do get played out in a contextualized way through the work of LCRC. And looking at our next slide, we feel that through the Learning Communities Resource Center that our agencies are able to build capacity by capitalizing on peer knowledge and expertise, creating effective strategies, and promoting promising practices. And so as we take a look back at our previous work within the project, because we have been engaged in this work as the Learning Communities Resource Center for about 4 years, we have offered several topics that cut across various aspects of our anti-poverty work, and we are looking to basically canvas all of that knowledge that has been accumulated through our work in the project as a way of moving the discussion forward for the network in the coming years as we continue to lead this effort. And so in the past, we have had an opportunity to facilitate what we call both open and closed groups, spanning topics to include health intersections, poverty trends, decreasing family homelessness, bundling services to improve outcomes, trauma-informed approaches to alleviating poverty, which we'll talk about today, financial empowerment, results at the community level, and rural impact. And throughout the process, particularly for our closed group, they were very project-focused or project-based, as we would like to say, and in essence, those groups engaged in a process that started with what we called our formation phase, which really also gave agencies an opportunity to think about what the needs were for the the community or the families that they served, or as it related to the needs within the organization, and then determine what possible outcomes might be in terms of meeting those needs. And then our deep work within the learning community was to build our knowledge and then help agencies identify those strategies, those innovative strategies to push the agencies towards the achievement of those outcomes. And a part of what we are doing through this series is what we call our practice transformation, and that is turning that learning outward so that the entire community of community action can benefit from the work that has been done. And so this sort of highlights our overall approach, and what I want to say is you will hear from the learning community more or later, or you will hear from LCRC later in terms of opportunities for future engagement. And our hope is that as a result of today's presentation, you will learn a little bit, but also we hope that your curiosity will be piqued as it relates to trauma-informed approaches so that you might meet the needs of your customers more effectively, because ultimately we feel that in order for the true impact to happen in the way that is needed, transformation is required. And one of the things that the presenter today will talk about that we discovered related to the whole notion of trauma-informed approaches in particular is that it often calls for a change in organizational mindset or organizational structure. And really our hope is that for all of the work that we delve into within the LCRC, that it will motivate not only that individual change or transformation, but also invite agencies to engage in doing business differently so that we can move families forward. And so with that said, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Hyacinth McKinley, who is a program associate here at the partnership, who's going to talk about today's case, which we are excited to release to all of you. Randy?
Great. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Tiffany, and welcome again, everyone, once again, to this next installment in our Anti-Poverty Practice Series. And today we're going to be talking about, if we could look at the next slide, today we're going to be talking about trauma-informed approaches to alleviate poverty. And as Tiffany just summarized, what this webinar series is really about is about bringing all of those best practices and strategic lessons learned that participants in the learning community have brought together over the course of the last 20 months, and to summarize those in webinar events, but also publications that we're going to be releasing over the course of the next 6 weeks. So the cool thing for you guys is that you're going to get access to this right after today's webinar event. We're going to tell you where you can find the publication that summarizes everything that we're going to be talking about today. So the subject area and the corresponding learning community group that we're going to be focusing on today relates to trauma-informed care. I'm certain that most of you on the phone are somewhat familiar with the basic concept of trauma, but if not, we like to define it on this project using the definition provided by SAMHSA, which defines trauma as the result of an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functions and physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Thus, as human service providers, it's easy to understand why it's a good practice to ensure that we offer services in a manner that reflects the fact that many of the people that we're serving may have experienced some form of trauma in their lifetime. And this would result in a case management framework that seeks to make clients more comfortable and provide them with access to the resources that they need to cope with their trauma. But given the complexities of trauma and its various manifestations, there may be various elements of your organizational culture that might fall outside your typical case management work that can cause your clients to experience trauma. Things such as your intake procedures, or how much, the amount of information that people need to provide over the phone to schedule a first appointment, or even things like the lighting and size of your waiting rooms or the openness of the entryway into your organization can cause customers to be reminded of traumatic events from their past. And beyond clients, your staff, too, are susceptible to experience trauma as a result of their work and various elements of your organizational culture or procedures. What makes a trauma-informed organization is that its perception of trauma goes simply beyond utilizing clinical treatments, but is instead an intentional organizational mindset and treatment frameworks that work together to understand, recognize, and respond to the various effects and manifestations of trauma for clients and staff alike. Thus, it's really a continuous effort to see what you see here on the screen, to shift the paradigm from what's wrong with you to what happened to you, both within and outside of your agency. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So, given the reach of the Community Action Network into some of America's most vulnerable populations, it's of critical importance for agencies to be well-informed and equipped to help individuals overcome the impacts of their trauma on their journey to self-sufficiency. Throughout our experience in the learning community, we have found that organizations are better able to achieve outcomes in this work by having the ability to share and discuss their progress with their peers, and also to capitalize on knowledge and resources provided by subject matter experts. And this is something that not only the participants in today's case study that we're going to be talking about shortly, but throughout this LCG and the learning community at large have stated as an essential element in the amount of progress that they were able to achieve in their piloting programs. And the graphic here on the screen kind of maps that progress that a lot of our agencies reported was their experience by participating in the learning community. That really where kind of the sinews in their brain started firing was by building on those peer-to-peer relationships that they were able to form across the country, knowing that there were other community action agencies like themselves that were investing in this work, that were committing to taking this time to get down into the resources and to really come up with some tangible results at the end of their 20-month period. So that led them through that process, and we see that a lot of the participants in our group were able to make some really concrete steps towards an integrated trauma-informed care approach, and we're going to be talking about 3 of those cases today. So, before diving into those specific case studies, I think it's important to take a brief look at the research on trauma and its impact on children and families in America. This is an area of study that has actually greatly increased in popularity over the course of the last 15 years because research continues to unfold and unveil the deep interconnectedness between stress, health, and poverty. But to summarize some key points from this extensive body of research, first we know that trauma's impacts are expansive and unpredictable. 2 or more individuals can experience the same traumatic event and yet exhibit completely different experiences of trauma, or even understand that they were traumatized or feel that they were traumatized at all. And there are numerous factors that can impact how people experience trauma, from race to religion to sexual orientation, age, you name it. It can have an impact on how trauma manifests itself in someone's life. But a phenomenon that research is uncovering that is also interesting is that trauma is not always localized to the people that experience it. Traumatic events can traverse families, communities, cultures, and even entire generations. But more often than not, people claim to experience at least one traumatic event over the course of their lifetime, as noted by the statistic here on the screen. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Another important part about why it's of critical importance for community action agencies to be trauma-informed is that research suggests that people who live in poverty have a higher likelihood of actually experiencing trauma across the lifespan. And this makes sense if you think about the fact that poverty tends to be accompanied by low-safety environments, with crime, violence, and abuse statistically occurring at higher rates than in more affluent areas. So while trauma is undoubtedly seen across the general population of the United States, it poses a particular threat to low-income individuals and families. And this exposure to trauma also translates into poorer or worse health outcomes for families in these areas, but particularly it has an impact on children living in poverty. So much so that last year, in 2016, the American Academy of Pediatrics named poverty as the single most chronic health issue facing children in the United States today. But the good news in this dreary picture that I've been painting so far is that it is documented and proven that people who experience trauma survivors can lead healthy, self-sufficient lives, but only when they're connected to the resources and the support that they need to better cope with and understand their trauma. So it can quite literally make a world of difference when individuals and families in need can look to organizations in their community that have a comprehensive trauma-informed organizational mindset. But equally important to its impact on customers is also the benefits of being trauma-informed that we see on an organizational level and for staff. So the research in this area is a bit newer, but it's beginning to show that organizations actually run better, that there is a business case when it is understood and reflected in personnel policies and staff culture, that staff experience trauma and that they have the coping strategies to deal with that. Particularly in our line of work, in human services professionals face a high risk of experiencing compassion fatigue, which is defined as an extreme state of tension or preoccupation with the suffering of those being helped to the degree that it can create secondary trauma for the helper. So basically it's like secondhand trauma. I know most of you are probably familiar with the term secondhand smoke, but people who work in the human services field actually experience high rates of what's called compassion fatigue or secondhand trauma. So as I mentioned before, an understanding of trauma should be present not just in the clinical practices and the casework of an organization, but throughout all aspects of organizational practice and policy as well. So before we get into the case study, as I mentioned earlier, I want to thank all of the participants in this work, the agencies and the specific individuals that you see here. As Tiffany mentioned earlier, participated in our 20-month cohort of the learning community. So we want to thank them for their efforts and their willingness to share this work out with the network to help improve outcomes across the country. And if you wanted to be connected with any of these individuals in particular, as we go through the case study information for today, we would be happy to do that. Just send that in through the chat and we'd be happy to connect. So we're going to look at our first case study, and that comes to us from the folks in Kentucky, Northern Kentucky Community Action Commission. They are located in Covington, Kentucky, with a service area that comprises 8 counties. They're a medium-sized agency with about 140 staff and 26 board members. This agency's participation in the Trauma-Informed Approaches LCG was spearheaded by Vice President of Family Services, Dawn Fogarty. Her primary interest in entering this cohort was to uncover strategies for increasing support and education across all levels of their staff on various aspects of trauma-informed care. Provision of services that are trauma-informed has been a priority for this agency prior to their enrollment in the learning community, but they really saw this as an opportunity to gain strategies, lessons from the field in real time from their peers in the group, but also utilizing that subject matter expertise to help guide them through that process and provide them with some concrete steps that they could then implement going forward in that organization. So those discussions resulted in the project goals that you see here on the screen, but mainly their goals in their cohort. What they wanted to do at the end of that 20 months was to increase leadership support and understanding of the importance of trauma-informed care, increase opportunities for education of staff on various aspects of trauma, and create a concrete action plan to create a more integrated and comprehensive trauma-informed treatment framework. So Dawn and her support team set out in this effort by conducting a comprehensive agency self-assessment survey to establish a baseline knowledge of trauma principles and practices throughout their organization. So after 3 months of planning and focus group testing amongst the staff of their organization, they were able to receive I believe it was about a 10% response rate, which was above their target for staff participating in this survey, and that was able to help them particularly pinpoint what areas of staff where they needed to invest particular training or resources to make sure that their organizational capacity was where it needed to be to deal with their clients. And a more comprehensive overview of the self-assessment survey and the analysis of the responses that they received is also provided in the publication that corresponds with today's event. So in those efforts, the main barrier that they experienced was finding ways to maintain staff momentum and engagement following the self-assessment. While the assessment provided them with critical insight on what specific areas they needed to focus their energy on, they sought to coordinate exactly how to provide those training and resources on a timetable that made sense for everyone in their organization. And of course, competing schedules and times, that seems to be the biggest barrier that they experience in their work. But as a result of the input from their peers and working through this group, they were able to leave the cohort with some pretty concrete outcomes that you'll see here on the screen. But in addition to administering that survey, they also provided updates to their onboarding and orientation process. So it resulted in concrete changes in their HR policies and their work. They instituted an annual training and development plans for frontline staff. And they began training leadership on support and self-care strategies for staff, so specifically helping leadership at their organization to identify signs of that secondhand trauma in their staff and to help them develop and utilize coping strategies that they can use with their staff to make sure that they don't experience that compassion fatigue and they can still serve their clients in a way that is most meaningful and impactful for them and doesn't cause any additional trauma. So from that resulted in some key steps in their progress, what they identified as key steps throughout their progress in the cohort. And really it kicked off with the administration of that agency-wide self-assessment survey. That was kind of a heavy lift for them. As I mentioned, it took them months to get that off the ground, but that really, again, helped to establish a baseline of understanding of what their organizational knowledge and understanding of trauma was at that time. Then from that survey, that helped them to understand that they needed to facilitate an organizational learning framework for this event. So it wasn't going to be good enough for just management to meet sometimes. It wasn't going to work for just frontline staff to meet sometimes. But they really decided from that they needed to put an emphasis on co-learning across, so horizontally and vertically throughout their organization. And then from those discussions, they were able to see and make some concrete changes in their policy and procedures at their organization. So again, that specifically includes updates to their onboarding and orientation process and that training for leadership to help staff cope with secondhand trauma. So another case study that we looked at comes to us from Wisconsin. West Central Wisconsin Community Action Agency, also known as WESCAP. They are located in Glenwood City, Wisconsin, and they serve 7 counties. They have about 51 staff and 21 board members. So at the beginning of this cohort in late 2015, Associate Director Robin Thibodeau and Homeless Prevention Programs Manager Corin Tuberty enrolled to take part in the Trauma-Informed Approaches LCG in hopes of obtaining resources and strategies necessary to inspire a trauma-informed culture shift throughout their entire organization. They actually already had a background in trauma-informed work in a lot of their homelessness prevention work. And seeing the substantial improvements to customer service and also staff outcomes that they were able to see as a result of the efforts in this program, the WESCAP team then decided that it was of critical importance to replicate this approach across the entire organization so that everyone in their agency, from board members to volunteers, contributed to a trauma-informed mindset that was reflected both within and outside of their organization. So over the course of their participation in the learning community, they had 3 specific goals that they wanted to accomplish, which you see here on the screen. They wanted to gain an in-depth knowledge of how to educate their staff about trauma and trauma-informed services. Again, they wanted to identify some concrete steps that they could use to foster a trauma-informed culture shift within their organization. And they also wanted to become a local research and training authority on the importance and prevalence of trauma in their community. So, capitalizing on the resources and strategy discussions from their LCG meetings, WESCAP was able to actually outline 4 criteria that they used to measure how the agency is doing in terms of being trauma-informed. Called the 4 R's of a trauma-informed approach, they wanted to ensure that their organization saw a realization of the prevalence of trauma in their community, recognition of the effects of trauma on clients, a response of putting their knowledge into practice and use with clients and staff, and also resistance of any re-traumatization. Using these measurements as their guide, the WESCAP team was able to achieve some significant headway towards those 3 goals. However, of course, this progress was not without some setbacks. In particular, the loss of key staff members over the course of this project created a significant delay in WESCAP's initially proposed project timeline, and this resulted in a delay of accomplishment of some of these originally proposed action items, including a comprehensive organizational self-assessment survey. But in light of that unforeseen staff turnover and the resulting updates to their timeline that needed to be made, some of the outcomes that we're seeing for WESCAP include, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So we can go to the next slide. Some of their outcomes include they were able to increase staff knowledge and skills, not just on the prevalence of trauma, but also on trauma-informed services. And specifically in that, they actually really kind of lit a fire within their organization. And now their staff are actively interested in learning more about the theory, research, and practice of trauma-informed care. And alongside of that, they were able to obtain buy-in from agency staff and leadership on the importance of trauma-informed care. As a result of that, they now also have a better organizational understanding of the prevalence of trauma, both outside of their organization, so looking at the client experience, but also for their staff. What policies do they have? What kind of culture or elements of their office culture contribute to a trauma worldview, not just for their clients, but for staff as well. And also it caused what they feel is a tangible shift in their organizational culture and policy. Some keys to success that they outlined for us are shown here on the screen, but really the foundation for the progress that they were able to see started with that prior experience that they had in trauma-informed care and their homelessness prevention work. That gave them an idea of beginnings of strategies that seem to be impactful for clients in their community, but then also got them thinking about, well, how prevalent is trauma in our community, and what are we doing as an organization to curb that trauma, but in what ways might we be causing people additional trauma? And from that, through the resources that they gained in this group, they then conducted an in-service training for all of their staff. That, again, helped to cultivate an opportunity for organizational learning and to help everyone across their organization understand their role in either helping someone overcome their trauma or potentially re-traumatizing a client. Finally, that then led to the conceptualization of trauma-informed care as an organizational mindset. So it's not just in your case management framework, but it should also be represented in the policies and procedures of your organization. So the last case study that we are going to talk about today, last but certainly not least, comes to us from Nebraska. And this organization is a little bit different than the 2 previous case studies because they attempted to encourage a trauma-informed organizational shift across the entire state. So the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services was a participant in the Trauma-Informed Approaches LCG, and their goal was really to increase organizational awareness for trauma-informed care and to become a local training authority, not just for their region, but across the entire state of Nebraska, so all 93 counties there. So that's quite an impressive feat. But their efforts in this work were led by former CSBG specialist Jennifer Drabelvis, and her efforts were really focused on establishing a baseline knowledge of trauma and then providing the corresponding training and resources needed for the 9 community action agencies located throughout the state. So unfortunately, it was exactly the massive scale of this proposal that proved to be most challenging for Jennifer and her team to overcome. Completing priorities and limited staff time, are a problem with interagency efforts. So you can imagine that that was only compounded when you're working across an entire state. But in addition to staff capacity, the Nebraska DHS team was also impeded by differing levels of understanding and the corresponding training needs across the organizations that they were looking to serve. So again, that differences in level of understanding can be something that's hard to tackle within an agency. So imagine trying to find a common ground across an entire state. But even in the midst of the scale of their work, they were able to still administer a statewide self-assessment survey. They received about a 30% response rate on that survey, and they had participation from all 9 of the community action agencies that were in the state. So they are working with a local institution to analyze that data, and that should be forthcoming. Hopefully, I think they said within the next year, but they're looking to really analyze that data and find out the baseline of trauma-informed care and practices across the state of Nebraska. And they were so inspired by their time in the learning community that they're actually hoping to continue that model and facilitate their own learning community on the state level to help not just the CAAs, but any human services provider in their state that's interested and willing to learn more about being a trauma-informed organization. So given the challenges that they faced, unfortunately in this time they weren't able to have a lot of concrete action steps, but what you see here on the screen kind of outlines their plans for the next 12 months going forward out of what they learned in this cohort. So as I mentioned, they're working with some local organizations to analyze the results from their survey, and then they want to use that information to see where trauma-informed projects will align nicely with work that's already going on the state level. Then they want to increase their internal organizational capacity. They want to do an additional assessment specifically for state program directors, and they want to administer an additional training. I know it says September 30th, but I think their timeline for that was a little bit more delayed. And then finally, they really want to set up that learning community across the state. They want to continue to delve into the research, continue to explore subject matter experts on the local and national level to facilitate their own learning community and to really be kind of a learning, hub for people that are interested in trauma-informed care in their state and across the region. So some really exciting things are coming out of that work. So those 3 case studies that we talked about today provide just a snippet of the progress and success that we saw across this learning community group, but they helped us to identify some key things, some keys to success that you see here on the screen in organizations that are interested in becoming trauma-informed. And due to its potential benefits for both clients and staff, we found that it's really important for community action agencies to encourage a trauma-informed environment within their agency. These cases detail just some of the steps that organizations can take, but really some key takeaways from this work is understanding that a critical element of being trauma-informed is establishing a clear understanding of the impacts and manifestations of trauma across all levels and departments of staff. And this allows for the organization as a whole to contemplate the ways that their policies, procedures, and interactions play a role in potentially harming clients' self of well-being. And these cases also stress to us that becoming trauma-informed requires patience. It's something that is an organizational shift, and as such, it's something that takes time. It's not something that you're going to have a lot of concrete action steps that you might see over a year or a year and a half, but it is much more a long-term project, and it's a continuous process of looking at your organizational policies, of looking at your case management framework, of looking at elements of your culture to make sure that they intertwine together to make clients and staff feel like they are supported in their journey towards well-being. So that was it, and again, this case study is going to be live following today's webinar event. We really encourage you to go and download it. It'll be available on the partnership website, on the Learning Community blog, and also on the CSBG TTA Resource Center. And because you guys registered for today's event, you'll also receive the link to this publication and some additional resources in a follow-up email that you can expect to receive in a couple of days. So, exciting. So I'll show you specifically where you can, how you can directly get to this resource. Through the partnerships website, if you go to the drop-down menu and you select the Toolkit and Publication Library, you'll find it there. If you also scroll down to the news section near the bottom of the homepage, there's a little graphic that talks about the Anti-Poverty Practice Series. If you click on that, that will also take you to where you can download today's publication. You can also find it on the Learning Community blog. If you go to our resources section, you can see this publication, but also all of the resources that have been cultivated, uncovered, developed, and shared across this cohort of the learning community. And you can sort it by topic area. You can look at our specific groups and the progress that happens there. But if you're interested in receiving updates, because we update this blog regularly, you can actually go from the homepage. If you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you can click there to subscribe to receive live updates on resources and postings to the blog. So we encourage you to do that. And finally, you can also find this on the CSBG TPA Resource Center. In addition to this publication and a vast array of many others, you can also find a consultant bank and also information on how to submit a specific TPA request that your organization might have. So thank you for joining us for today's event, and this is just part of our national webinar series. We have plenty of other events coming up that we encourage you to take part in. If you liked what you heard today, we highly encourage you to go to the partnerships website so you can register for some of our upcoming events. Particularly, we encourage you to join in for the continuation of the Anti-Poverty Practice Series. Today we talked about trauma-informed care and that corresponding learning community group, but there are 3 other learning communities that are actually going to have publications released and a corresponding webinar event. You can see some of those events here on our screen, but the first 2 have already happened, but we have the next one coming up on November 16th, and that's going to be focusing in on specific CAA anti-poverty practices, and you'll actually hear from some of the practitioners that participated in these various publications, and you'll get to hear directly from their mouth what their experience was and what their lessons learned were. Also in the series, we have Rural Impact, which is coming up on November 28th, and on December 4th, we'll have Financial Empowerment case study as well. In addition to the Anti-Poverty Practice Series, we also have some additional webinar events coming up. We're very excited about this initiative, but coming up next week, actually, is going to be Community Action, Your Money, Your Goals Training Week. And we have a couple of different ways that you can engage and take part in this event, but you can visit our website for the full information. But here you can see the different ways that you can participate. The first is coming up on November 14th. We really encourage you to have your frontline staff, get them trained in Your Money, Your Goals, and you can do that by having them attend this webinar that's going to take place on the 14th. It's 2 hours, and all participants will have to take just a really short pre- and post-test that we'll send out via email before the webinar, but that's a great tool to use with clients to help make financial empowerment a little bit more conversational and to provide tools and strategies to help them understand financial empowerment a little bit better. You can also sign up with Tiffany, who is a certified Your Money, Your Goals trainer for some TA. If you're thinking about planning your own in-house Your Money, Your Goals training event, if you're not able to make that webinar, she's definitely available. You can find out her office hours on our website. And finally, we really want to see you guys out there using the toolkit. So on November 16th, we are declaring that Community Action, Your Money, Your Goals Day. So that's a day where you organize a Your Money, Your Goals training in-house, and we want you to send us pictures. And you can do that by using the hashtag YMYGCAP. So we really want to see a lot of encouragement, and we hope you guys join us for that initiative. So in addition to the Your Money, Your Goals, we also have some other upcoming webinar events that I'll go through quickly. One that we're really excited about is coming up on November 15th, and it's called Ready, Set, Go, a guide for facilitating a learning community. And this is specifically for state associations, but this is where we're going to take some of those the secrets from the recipe book that we use to facilitate the learning in the learning community and share those out with you so that you all can facilitate your own learning communities in your states and regions. So if that's something that interests you, we very much encourage you to register for that event. We hope to see you there. And we have a publication that will be released in tandem with that event. So you can check that out. We also have another webinar that's coming up on the 21st, which will be about volunteer engagement. So one of our staff here at the partnership, Charity Frankowski, will also be joined by some members of our network who have some pretty innovative strategies on how they maintain volunteer engagement. So do check that out and join us for that event. Next, on the 27th, we have another event that's about learning communities but is focused more towards state CSBG offices. So if you happen to be from a state CSBG office, we really hope you register for that event. But we're going to talk to you again about strategies that you can use to support agencies in your state and in your region to help them develop innovative anti-poverty practices. And also on November 29th, we're going to have a resource review related to everything that we've learned from the learning community that deals with racial equity work. So Tiffany and I are going to be hosting that event. So if you didn't see enough of us today, you can join us on the 29th and you'll see us again talking about some really exciting resources that we have in that area. So please do join us. Of course, in this work, in addition to thanking our participants and the members of this learning community group, we have to give special recognition to our subject matter experts. They really guided this conversation. They really got into the nitty-gritty and the weeds with each organization to guide them through their work, to help them identify strategies and resources that were impactful in their work, and we just want to take a moment to thank them. Elena Cohen and Catherine Marshall, and their contact information is listed here on the screen. So if you want to reach out and ask them about strategies, resources, and just pick their brain on what it means for organizations to be trauma-informed and about organizational learning, there's some people that you can reach out to, and they would love to hear from you. And finally, here is the rest of the LCRC team. Of course, we have Tiffany Marley, who's the project director. We have Jarl Crocker, who's the director of training and technical assistance. Courtney Kohler, who's our senior associate for training and technical assistance. Liza Porras, who is the program associate for TNTA, and Charity Frankowski, who is our VISTA lead on the Rural Impact Project. This is a really close-knit team, and we do all that we can to facilitate these training events for you all out in the field, whether it's these webinars, whether it's at our annual conventions and MLTC. We hope that we're providing content that is relevant for you all. So, looks like I have a question in the Q&A, so we have a few moments. So, we got a question in: did the Nebraska group develop its own self-assessment survey, or did they use an existing survey? That's a great question, because the self-assessment survey was a critical tool that was utilized by not only the Nebraska group, but most of the groups that participated in this learning community effort. And they actually use a previous toolkit that's available on the blog. I'm trying to remember who developed it, but it was developed in 2014, and it's about trauma-informed care for homeless clients. But in that, it has a really detailed self-assessment survey that a lot of agencies took and adapted for their own purposes. But we can definitely include that resource in the follow-up email that will go out from today's event. So we'll share that with you. Any other questions? I think that's it. So thank you for that question. If you have any others, you can, of course, reach out to any of us. You'll see the contact information for all of us here on the screen. You can reach out to any of us. We would love to provide you with some guidance and insight on not just trauma-informed care, but any of the focus areas that we have here at the Learning Communities Resource Center. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time and your participation in today's event, and that will conclude our webinar. Thank you all so much. Don't forget to check out our publication.